From March to May 1945, the series of strategic bombings carried out by the United States Army Air Forces, USAF, against Tokyo, Japan, stands as the pinnacle of conventional bombing in the history of human warfare due to its immense scale and devastating impact. Known as the Great Tokyo Air Raids by the Japanese military and codenamed Operation Meetinghouse by the U.S. military, this campaign was not an isolated tactical strike but a core measure by the Allied powers to destroy Japan's war-making capacity in the late stages of the Pacific War. It reflects a shift in U.S. strategic bombing doctrine, reveals the technical characteristics and brutal nature of modern warfare through its execution, and ultimately exerted a profound influence on Japan's decision to surrender. Based on declassified archives from both the U.S. and Japan, reports from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, USPS, and accounts of historical witnesses, this essay adopts a calm, objective academic perspective to reconstruct the causes, consequences, and detailed process of the event, shedding light on its complex significance in World War II history. The tactical choice behind the Tokyo firebombing was rooted in the practical dilemmas and strategic reflections of U.S. bombing operations against the Japanese mainland in 1944. As early as April 18, 1941, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle led 16 B-25 bombers launched from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet in a raid on Tokyo. Though it caused only minor material damage, this attack shattered the myth of the inviolability of the Japanese homeland and provided the U.S. military with preliminary experience in bombing Japan. However, truly effective strategic bombing, capable of inflicting substantial damage, would await the mass production of the B-29 Superfortress bomber and the establishment of forward bases. In June 1944, the U.S. military launched Operation Matterhorn, deploying B-29 bomber groups at airfields near Chengdu, China, to bomb Kyushu, Japan, and Japanese-occupied areas in Northeast Asia. By January 15, 1945, the 20th Air Force had conducted 49 sorties, dropping only 10,000 tons of bombs while losing 147 B-29s. Three core factors accounted for this inefficiency. First, the Chengdu bases were over 3,000 kilometers from the Japanese mainland, forcing B-29s to reduce their bomb load to carry extra fuel, resulting in a single plane payload of less than 3 tons. Second, the maritime climate surrounding the Japanese archipelago kept high-altitude cloud cover above 70% year-round, rendering the U.S. military's daytime high-altitude precision bombing tactics, honed in the European theater, ineffective, with bomb accuracy rates often below 10%. Third, Japan's military-industrial system differed fundamentally from Germany's. Key arms factories relied on components produced by small family workshops scattered throughout residential areas, making precision bombing unable to disrupt this decentralized production network. In the second half of 1944, the U.S. military's capture of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian in the Mariana Islands, via the island-hopping strategy, completely transformed the bombing landscape. These islands were only 2,400 kilometers from Tokyo, providing ideal forward bases for B-29s. Tinian Northfield eventually became the world's largest bomber base, capable of accommodating 500 B-29s simultaneously. On November 24, 1944, 88 B-29s took off from Saipan for the first U.S. bombing raid on Tokyo, targeting the Nakajima aircraft factory. However, due to the impact of high-altitude jet streams, only 30 aircraft located their targets, and just 10% of the bombs hit the intended area, failing to achieve tactical objectives. Major General Curtis LeMay, a pivotal figure in the tactical shift, emerged as a key decision-maker at this juncture. In January 1945, this officer, who had gained extensive experience commanding B-17 bomber groups in the European theater, was appointed commander of the 21st Bomber Command, taking charge of the B-29 units of the 313th, 314th, 315th, and 58th Wings. Upon arriving in Guam, LeMay immediately suspended bombing operations and organized a staff team to conduct a systematic analysis of previous operational data. He identified two critical breakthroughs. First, 85% of Tokyo's buildings were constructed of wood or bamboo, densely packed and highly susceptible to ignition by incendiary bombs, which could trigger cascading fires. Second, Japan's nighttime air defense capabilities were weak, its radar systems were designed primarily for high-altitude targets, and it lacked sufficient night fighters and effective ground guidance systems. Based on these insights, LeMay proposed a revolutionary tactical plan, abandoning daytime high-altitude precision bombing in favor of nighttime low-altitude incendiary bombing. Specific adjustments included removing all defensive turrets from B-29s except the tail gun, including 10.50 caliber machine guns in the nose, fuselage sides, and top, as well as the pilot's armor plating, reducing the weight of each aircraft by approximately 1.8 tons and increasing the bomb load from 3 tons to 5 to 6.4 tons, lowering the bombing altitude from 10,000 meters to 1,524 to 1,829 meters to avoid high-altitude jet streams and improve target identification, and adopting a streaming bombing pattern, where aircraft enter the target area individually, rather than in dense formations, to reduce the risk of concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Some staff officers questioned this tactic as a suicidal gamble, but LeMay insisted on taking full responsibility and delayed reporting the plan to Washington, buying time for its implementation. Innovation and ammunition configuration progressed in parallel. The U.S. military abandoned its focus on high-explosive bombs, instead adopting two types of cluster incendiary bombs, the M47 and E46. Each M47 incendiary bomb contained 38 submunitions, which burst at an altitude of 30.5 meters upon impact, releasing 0.6-meter-long incendiary sticks filled with napalm, capable of generating temperatures of 1,100 degrees Celsius and adhering strongly to surfaces. The E46 incendiary bomb used a magnesium-based incendiary agent, burning for up to 10 minutes and penetrating wooden roofs to ignite indoor combustibles. From February 23 to 24, 1945, LeMay organized 174 B-29s for a test bombing, dropping 450 tons of incendiary bombs on northeastern Tokyo and destroying 2.56 square kilometers of area, verifying the effectiveness of the incendiary tactic. This test served as a direct prelude to the large-scale bombings in March. March 9, 1945, presented an optimal strategic window for large-scale bombing in the Pacific Theater. On that day, the Battle of Iwo Jima had entered its 18th day, with remaining Japanese forces pinned down in a corner of Mount Suribachi, losing their ability to provide early warning of U.S. bombers. The U.S. 58th Task Force cruised near Japanese coastal waters, diverting the mobile forces of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet. LeMay selected Tokyo's northeastern Shitamachi district as the primary target, a 6.4-kilometer-long, 4.8-kilometer-wide area that was both a densely populated residential zone, with over 100,000 people per square kilometer, and home to numerous family workshops producing aircraft components. With 90% of its buildings made of wood, it perfectly matched the ideal conditions for incendiary tactics. At 17:35 that day, 334 B-29s from the 73rd, 313th, and 314th Bombardment Wings began taking off from airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, a process that lasted nearly 3 hours. Each of the 169 aircraft in the 73rd Wing carried 6.4 tons of incendiary bombs, as did the 121 aircraft in the 313th Wing, the 56 aircraft in the 314th Wing, which faced a longer flight distance, carried 4.5 tons of ordnance each. Brigadier General Lawrence S. Cuter served as the air commander, with his aircraft, Truman Captain, acting as the lead plane for target guidance. To maintain stealth, the formation flew in radio silence, following a low-altitude route over the Mariana Trench. At 0:08 on March 10, 4 unarmed lead aircraft arrived over Tokyo first, circling at an altitude of 7,600 meters and dropping flares. Tokyo residents, accustomed to U.S. daytime bombings, remained unaware of the danger, many still asleep. Though Japanese radar detected the aerial targets, it misidentified them as reconnaissance planes. Air raid sirens were not sounded until 0:15, when the first incendiary bombs hit the ground. At 0:17, Brigadier General Cuter ordered the lead aircraft to drop bombs. 2 waves of planes flew perpendicular routes, releasing incendiary bombs to form a prominent X-shaped fire marker on the ground, guiding subsequent aircraft to the target area. Starting at 0:22, the main bomber force began entering the bombing route individually. B-29s flew at 1,500 meters with 1.5-minute intervals between aircraft. The crew of the Enola Gay, from the 73rd Wing, later used for the Hiroshima atomic bombing, recalled, at the moment the bombs were dropped, The streets below were like a lit fuse, and the flames spread at a visible speed. By 2:45, 279 B-29s have completed their bombing runs, dropping a total of 1,667 tons of incendiary bombs, 1,783 tons according to Japanese statistics, including 381,300 submunitions. The firestorm triggered by the bombing became the most destructive force of the operation. Intense combustion heated surface air to over 1,000 degrees Celsius, creating powerful updrafts that sucked in cold air from the surrounding area, forming a firestorm with winds reaching 300 km per hour. This extreme weather not only accelerated the spread of flames but also reduced oxygen levels to below 10% in some areas. Records from the Tokyo Fire Department show that the first fire engines to arrive were flipped over by the firestorm, and firefighters could not approach the blaze due to the extreme heat. Residents along the Sumida River jumped into the water to escape, only to suffer severe burns as the water temperature rose above 60 degrees Celsius. Hundreds of charred bodies floated on the river's surface. Inside the Meiji Theater, over 2,000 shelter seekers died of oxygen deprivation, their bodies piled 2 meters high. Japan's air defense system collapsed completely during the bombing. The 10th Flying Division, Imperial Japanese Army, responsible for air defense of the capital region, commanded by Lieutenant General Konori Kondo, had over 210 aircraft, but only 25 of them were Nakajima J-1N-1S Gecko, Irving, night fighters capable of nighttime operations. Lacking effective ground radar guidance, these fighters struggled to lock onto targets in the firelit night sky. Some were even mistakenly shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft guns. Ground air defense was the responsibility of the 1st Anti-Aircraft Division, commanded by Lieutenant General Takashi Kanoka, which had over 780 anti-aircraft guns. However, only a small number of Type 3 plus 120mm anti-aircraft guns could reach the altitude of the B-29s, and poor nighttime aiming accuracy meant most shells exploded either above or below the aircraft. The U.S. military lost only 14 B-29s, with 42 damaged and 96 aircrew killed or missing, far below the pre-operational estimate of a 75% casualty rate. By dawn on March 10, fires in the bombed area were still spreading. The thick smoke over Tokyo was visible 250 kilometers away over the Pacific Ocean. According to a post-war USPS report, the operation destroyed 41 square kilometers of Tokyo, 25% of the city center, destroying 268,358 buildings. 83,793 people were confirmed dead, 79,466 bodies according to Japan's Ministry of Health and Welfare, including many unidentifiable remains. Nearly 100,000 were injured, and 1 million were left homeless. The Japanese government deployed over 2,000 laborers to clear the bodies, a process that took 25 days. Mass cremations were used in some areas due to the sheer number of corpses. The devastating strike on March 10 did not end U.S. bombing operations. Drawing on the experience of the first raid, LeMay quickly adjusted his deployment. On the night of March 11, 313 B-29s bombed Nagoya, dropping 1,700 tons of incendiary bombs and destroying 20 square kilometers of the city. On March 13, they bombed Osaka, with 1,600 tons of incendiary bombs igniting 13 square kilometers. On March 16, they raided Kobe, destroying 11 square kilometers with 1,500 tons of incendiary bombs. These operations inflicted severe damage on Japan's military industry. The Mitsubishi engine plant in Nagoya saw a 70% drop in production capacity, and the artillery shell production line at the Osaka arsenal was completely paralyzed. On March 24, the U.S. military refocused its bombing on Tokyo. Led by the 315th Wing, 201 B-29s targeted the industrial zone in western Tokyo, dropping 1,500 tons of incendiary bombs and 500 tons of high-explosive bombs. By this time, the Japanese government had urgently formed National Volunteer Corps to assist in air defense, but these untrained civilians, armed only with light weapons, posed little threat to the B-29 formations. The bombing completely destroyed the Nakajima Aircraft Musashi plant in western Tokyo, which had previously produced 300 fighter engines per month. The U.S. military lost only 6 B-29s in this operation, the lowest casualty rate for a single mission. By March 28, the 21st Bomber Command had exhausted its stock of incendiary bombs, forcing a temporary halt to bombing. In just 19 days, the U.S. military had conducted 1,600 B-29 sorties, dropping 12,000 tons of bombs, 42% of which fell on Tokyo. Data from Japan's Economic Stabilization Board showed that Tokyo's ability to supply military components dropped by 60%, machine tool losses reached 35%, 1.5 million residents fled to rural areas, and the city faced a severe labor shortage. In April 1945, U.S. forces landed on Okinawa. To support ground operations, the 21st Bomber Command resumed large-scale bombing of Tokyo in May. By this time, Japan's air defense capabilities were on the verge of collapse. The 10th Flying Division had only 37 operational aircraft left, the 1st Anti-Aircraft Division had lost over half of its Type 3 plus 120mm anti-aircraft guns, and ammunition reserves were less than 20% of normal levels. Tokyo's firefighting system was completely paralyzed. Of the original 3,000 fire engines, fewer than 200 remained, and water supplies were scarce. On the night of May 9, 307 B-29s took off from Tinian, flying low along the Sumida River in eastern Tokyo to conduct precision river-guided bombing. Aircraft dropped bombs at 500-meter intervals, and 4,500 tons of incendiary bombs spread along both banks of the river, forming a 1.5-kilometer wide, 8-kilometer long fire belt. Flames quickly crossed the river, merging the eastern and northern riverbank areas into a single sea of fire. A unique feature of this bombing was the asphyxiation effect caused by the flames. Oxygen was completely depleted in low-lying areas, killing large numbers of civilians hiding in basements. A field survey by the University of Tokyo Medical School found that 60% of deaths along the Sumida River were due to oxygen deprivation rather than burns. On May 26, the U.S. military conducted its final large-scale bombing of Tokyo. 500 B-29s, a record for a single operation, carried 4,000 tons of incendiary bombs, focusing on the remaining residential areas in northern and western Tokyo. By this time, no intact neighborhoods remained in Tokyo. Pilots described the scene in their mission reports. The ground looked like a black ocean, only the outline of rivers allowed us to identify targets. This operation destroyed the last 12 square kilometers of the city, bringing Tokyo's total destroyed area to 169 square kilometers, 56% of the city's total area. In an emergency report on the same day, Japan's Ministry of Home Affairs stated, "Tokyo has lost its urban functions and become a de facto dead city." On May 29, the U.S. military dispatched 100 B-29s to bomb railway hubs surrounding Tokyo, completely cutting off the city's supply lines to the outside world. With this, the 1945 Tokyo firebombing, from March to May, officially concluded. According to final USP statistics, the U.S. military conducted 2,251 B-29 sorties over these 3 months, dropping 17,700 tons of bombs, including 15,300 tons of incendiary bombs and 2,400 tons of high-explosive bombs. Tokyo's total death toll reached 140,000, with 300,000 injured. Its population fell from 2 million to 600,000, only those who remained behind. 1.1 million buildings were destroyed, and direct economic losses amounted to $1.6 billion, at 1945 exchange rates. The process and outcome of the Tokyo firebombing vividly reflected the vast gap between the U.S. and Japan in strategic decision-making, technological equipment, and organizational mobilization. The U.S. success stemmed from systematic tactical innovation and efficient logistical support, while Japan's defeat exposed structural flaws in its air defense system and inefficiencies in its war mobilization. The U.S. tactical shift benefited from a flexible command structure and adequate technical backing. General Henry H. Arnold, commander of the 20th Air Force, granted LeMay tactical autonomy, allowing him to adjust plans based on on-the-ground conditions, a rare level of authority in the hierarchically rigid U.S. military. LeMay's staff team included meteorologists, ordnance experts, and intelligence analysts, who produced 300 pages of data analysis reports daily to inform tactical adjustments. For example, based on Tokyo's monsoon patterns, bombing times were fixed between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m., when wind direction maximized the spread of flames. The technical characteristics of the B-29 Superfortress were central to the success of the incendiary tactic. Known as the Super Fortress, this bomber was equipped with 4 Wright R-3350 engines, had a maximum range of 6,430 kilometers, and could carry 9 tons of ordnance for 12 hours of continuous flight. To adapt to nighttime low-altitude flight, the U.S. military made targeted modifications to the B-29. After removing turrets, aerodynamic dampers were added to improve low-altitude stability by 40%. The IN/APQ-13 radar was replaced, extending target detection range from 5 km to 10 km, and the fuel injection system was upgraded to reduce fuel consumption during low-altitude flight. The logistical system at Tinian was equally critical. The base had 8 runways, each 2,400 meters long, and 12,000 ground crew members, enabling a turnaround time of just 8 hours per B-29, supporting the high-intensity sortie rate. Intelligence support provided precise guidance for the bombing operations. Through the magic code-breaking system, the U.S. military gained insight into the deployment patterns of Japanese air defense forces. Reconnaissance aircraft took monthly aerial photographs of Tokyo to update target databases, and even architectural maps of Tokyo, marked with dense wooden building areas, were obtained through neutral countries. The target area for the March 10 bombing was selected based on aerial photographs taken in December 1944, which explicitly labeled the region as flammability level 9.2, on a 10-point scale. Japan's defeat in Tokyo's air defense stemmed from a dual predicament of strategic miscalculation and resource scarcity. In early 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff Office still clung to the Homeland Defense Strategy, diverting most resources to the defense of Okinawa and severely neglecting air defense capabilities. The 12th Area Army, Imperial Japanese Army, responsible for Tokyo's defense, commanded by General Shizuo Tanaka, controlled the 1st Anti-Aircraft Division and the 10th Flying Division, but received only enough fuel to support 1 hour of daily fighter patrols, and anti-aircraft gun ammunition was rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. Technological generational gaps further exacerbated Japan's defensive disadvantages. Japan's main night fighter, the Nakajima J1N1S Gecko, lacked airborne radar and relied on ground searchlights for guidance, but Tokyo's searchlight units, hampered by power shortages, could only cover 30% of the city. The main anti-aircraft gun of the 1st Anti-Aircraft Division, the Type 88 75mm anti-aircraft gun, had an effective ceiling of only 8,000 meters, unable to reach B-29s flying at 1,500 meters. The more capable Type 3 plus 120mm anti-aircraft gun had only 102 units produced by March 1945, half of which could not be deployed due to a lack of tractors. The collapse of Japan's civil defense system was a key factor in the escalation of the disaster. Tokyo had 12,000 professional firefighters before the war, but fewer than 3,000 remained after the March 10 bombing. The government distributed 2 million simple gas masks but provided no firefighting equipment. In April 1945, Japan's Ministry of Home Affairs launched the Capital Evacuation Plan, calling for the evacuation of children under 15 and the elderly over 60. But only 30% of the plan was completed due to transportation paralysis. During the May bombings, Tokyo had only 9 doctors and 11 nurses left in its medical facilities, completely unable to handle the large-scale casualties. Japan's counterattacks were equally ineffective. The 10th Flying Division launched 800 fighter sorties between March and May, shooting down only 37 US B-29s while losing 120 of its own aircraft. The Imperial Japanese Navy's 302nd Air Group attempted to use Oka, Cherry Blossom, suicide aircraft, but their limited range prevented them from reaching the B-29 formations. Ground forces organized anti-aircraft sniper teams to fire at low-flying bombers with light weapons, but poor coordination led to frequent friendly fire incidents. As a critical turning point in the Pacific War, the Tokyo firebombing exerted far-reaching influence beyond the military sphere, leaving a profound mark on Japanese society, the course of the war, and post-war ethical debates. From a military perspective, the bombing precisely achieved the U.S. strategic goal of destroying Japan's war-making capacity. According to USP's reports, Japan's aircraft production fell from 800 units per month to 200 between March and May 1945, shipbuilding declined by 80%, and ammunition stockpiles decreased by 75%. As Japan's industrial center, Tokyo's collapse of its component supply network paralyzed national military production, leaving frontline Japanese forces short of ammunition and fuel. For Japanese society, the bombing completely shattered public will to continue the war. A June 1945 survey by the Japanese cabinet showed that the proportion of Tokyo residents supporting the continuation of the war fell from 45%, end of 1944, to 12%, while those hoping for an immediate truce rose to 68%. 1.5 million Tokyo refugees fled to rural areas, exacerbating the food crisis. Japan's 1945 grain production fell to 60% of pre-war levels, and spreading panic about the war's outcome. In his post-war memoirs, Japanese Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe admitted, the psychological impact of the Tokyo firebombing exceeded that of the atomic bombings. It made the Japanese people realize the complete collapse of homeland defense. In terms of the war's course, the Tokyo firebombing accelerated Japan's decision to surrender. In June 1945, Emperor Hirohito first mentioned considerations of ending the war in an imperial conference, stating explicitly that the damage caused by air raids has left the country unable to continue fighting. After the issuance of the Potsdam Declaration in July, the Japanese military still advocated for homeland decisive battle, but the peace faction in the cabinet gained the upper hand. Though the emperor's imperial rescript on the termination of the war, August 15, did not directly mention the bombings, its phrase "the war situation has not improved, and world trends are unfavorable to us" implicitly acknowledged the decisive impact of strategic bombing. From an ethical and historical evaluation perspective, the Tokyo firebombing has been mired in controversy since its occurrence. Proponents defend it based on military necessity. In post-war hearings, LeMay argued that the bombings forced Japan to surrender 3 months earlier, avoiding an estimated 1 million casualties, including 400,000 U.S. troops, 2 million Japanese troops, and 5 million civilians, that would have resulted from an Allied invasion of the Japanese mainland. General Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, emphasized that Japan's total war model blurred the line between military and civilian targets. Family workshops and arms factories formed an indivisible production chain, making the bombing of residential areas a legitimate military objective. Critics, however, focus on the ethical issue of civilian casualties. Historian Howard Zinn, in A People's History of the United States, argued that the targeted civilian harm caused by incendiary bombing violated the Hague Convention's principle of distinguishing between military and civilian targets, and the death of 140,000 civilians far exceeded what was militarily necessary. Japanese scholar Masaki Takahashi, through interviews with bombing survivors, revealed the extreme suffering caused by incendiary bombs. Napalm's high temperature could melt human bones, and death by asphyxiation in the firestorm lasted 10 to 15 minutes. This controversy persisted in the post-war era. During a visit to Japan in 1963, LeMay acknowledged that if the U.S. had lost the war, I might have been tried as a war criminal, though he did not apologize. The gradual declassification of historical archives has provided new perspectives for objective evaluation. A 2015 release of internal reports from the 21st Bomber Command, U.S. National Archives, showed that the U.S. military was fully aware that civilian casualties would far exceed military casualties when formulating the bombing plan, but still proceeded based on the consideration of ending the war in the shortest time. A 2020 survey by Japan's Ministry of Health and Welfare, victims of the Tokyo firebombing, found that 83% of the victims were women, children, and the elderly, while only 7% had direct ties to military production. These data indicate that while the Tokyo firebombing achieved its military objectives, it also caused large-scale unnecessary civilian casualties, an ethical controversy that will persist in historical research. More than 70 years later, the historical memory of the Tokyo firebombing continues to shape U.S.-Japan relations and historical consciousness. In Tokyo, the Tokyo Air Raid Memorial Hall, located in the Koto Ward, opened in 2002. It houses artifacts from the March 10 bombing, including charred children's toys, civilian clothing, and firefighter helmets. A memorial ceremony is held every March 10, attended by the Emperor and Prime Minister. The museum's text describes the event as a tragic incident, emphasizing the suffering caused by war while avoiding direct reflection on Japan's responsibility for launching the aggressive war. In the United States, the historical significance of the Tokyo firebombing has long been overshadowed by the atomic bombings. It was not until 2010 that the U.S. Air Force Museum held its first special exhibition on LeMay's incendiary bombing, displaying B-29 wreckage and bombing tactical maps. The controversy surrounding the exhibition reflected a divide in U.S. society. Veteran groups emphasized its contribution to ending the war, while peace organizations criticized it for ignoring civilian casualties. A statue of Curtis LeMay still stands at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado, with its epitaph, "He shortened the war and saved lives," continuing to spark debate. In academic research, new perspectives in recent years have enriched understanding of the event. Military historian John Keegan, in the Second World War, proposed the paradox of strategic bombing. While the Tokyo firebombing achieved its military objectives, it established a precedent for indiscriminate bombing, exerting a negative impact on post-war war ethics. Social historian Barbara Tuchman, through an analysis of oral histories from Tokyo refugees, revealed the long-term impact of the bombings on Japan's social structure. In Tokyo's post-1945 urbanization process, fireproof blocks became a core principle of urban planning, and the proportion of wooden buildings dropped to less than 15%. From the perspective of historical lessons, the Tokyo firebombing highlighted the tension between military necessity and humanitarian bottom lines in modern warfare. It reminds later generations that war decisions must balance military objectives with ethical responsibility, avoiding large-scale harm to civilians in the name of ending the war. At the same time, this event also reflects the inherent consequences of aggressive war. Japan's launch of an external aggressive war ultimately ended with the devastating destruction of its own homeland. As historian Arnold Toynbee stated, the cruelty of war will eventually turn back on its initiators, and the Tokyo firebombing is a vivid illustration of this historical law. Looking back at the night sky over Tokyo in the spring of 1945, the 3-month-long sea of fire not only destroyed a city but also reshaped the form of war and the boundaries of war ethics. While commemorating the victims, we should also remember the profound lessons of war. Only by upholding the concept of peace and respecting humanitarian bottom lines can we avoid the recurrence of similar historical tragedies. This is perhaps the most precious historical legacy left by the Tokyo firebombing to future generations.